Frank Lucas watches Bumpy Johnson count 127,000 in cash, silent, methodical. Every bill checked twice. The money belongs to the Italians. Should have been delivered 3 hours ago. Frank's hands sweat. Downtown, Tommy Genovese's men are already asking questions. Bumpy doesn't rush. He never rushes. Outside, a black Cadillac idles. Its engine purrs like a waiting predator. Frank knows what happens to drivers who lose mob money. Bodies in the Hudson, concrete shoes. But Bumpy keeps counting. 127,000. He finally says, every dollar accounted for. He lights a cigarette. You know why we're late, Frank. Frank shakes his head. Bumpy smiles. Because I wanted to see if you'd run. 4 months earlier, Frank Lucas arrived in Harlem broke. Bumpy Johnson controlled numbers, protection, and respect across 140 blocks of Upper Manhattan. He wasn't the loudest boss. He was the smartest. While other gangsters flashed wealth, Bumpy wore conservative suits and invested in real estate. He owned buildings on Lenox Avenue. Financed legitimate businesses. Read books on military strategy. At 60, 2 years old, he'd survived 35 years in a business where most men died young. The Italian families respected him. The black community protected him. He'd done what seemed impossible. Built power without becoming a monster. Harlem in 1965 teetered on transformation. Malcolm X had been assassinated 3 months prior. The Civil Rights Act promised change, but delivered frustration. Young men like Frank saw opportunities in chaos. The heroin trade exploded. Vietnam created addicts by the thousands. The Italian mafia controlled supply chains, but demand outpaced their capacity. Smart operators could carve territory. Bumpy watched these young hustlers. Most were reckless, greedy, dead within months. But Frank Lucas showed something different: discipline, patience, the qualities Bumpy valued above all else. The stakes were generational. Bumpy had no biological heir. His empire needed succession planning. The Italians circled like sharks, waiting for weakness. One wrong move, one bad successor, and 40 years of work would dissolve. Everything Bumpy built would become footnotes in someone else's story. Nicky Barnes called himself Mr. Untouchable, 29 years old. Ran his own heroin operation across 116th Street. Made $50,000 weekly. Wore mink coats in summer and drove a canary, yellow Cadillac with his name on the plates. He'd built a crew of 15 soldiers, all young, all hungry. Nicky represented everything Bumpy despised: flash over substance, ego over strategy, short-term thinking. He dealt drugs openly, attracted police attention, treated Harlem like a playground instead of a community. But Nicky had ambition. He wanted Bumpy's territory. More importantly, he wanted Bumpy's connections. Nicky's plan was simple: prove Bumpy was finished. The old man couldn't control young blood, couldn't adapt to new markets, couldn't compete with Nicky's aggressive expansion. If Nicky could embarrass Bumpy publicly, the Italians would cut deals with new leadership. The younger generation would follow strength, not history. Nicky had already won 3 territorial wars, put 6 rival dealers in the hospital, killed 2 who wouldn't negotiate. His crew operated with military precision, coordinated drops, backup teams, escape routes. They'd never lost a shipment, never missed a payment, never shown weakness. Cops on his payroll numbered 14, including 2 detectives. His lawyer beat every charge. Nikki Barnes seemed bulletproof. 3 other Harlem bosses had tried challenging him. All 3 now worked for him. On February 8, 1965, Nicky sent word through intermediaries: the old king should retire before someone retires him. Nicky's plan relied on humiliation, not murder. Killing Bumpy would create martyrs and investigations, but exposing him as weak, as outdated, as unable to protect his own people, that would destroy him completely. Nikki identified Bumpy's vulnerability, Frank Lucas, the new driver, untested, unknown, a country boy from North Carolina who'd only been in Harlem 16 weeks. If Nikki could flip Frank, or better yet, expose him as incompetent, Bumpy's judgment would be questioned. His legendary ability to read people would seem fallible. May 28, 1965, Nikki placed a 15,000 on the street, whispered offers, beautiful women, promises of power. Frank could drive for a winner instead of a relic. Frank refused every approach. So Nikki shifted tactics. If Frank wouldn't betray Bumpy voluntarily, he'd be forced into a position where betrayal seemed inevitable. Small's Paradise, 2294 7th Avenue at 135th Street. June 11th, 11:30 p.m. 300 people packed the jazz club, smoke hung thick as curtains. Dizzy Gillespie's trumpet screamed through speakers. Waitresses in sequined dresses navigated tables carrying champagne and whiskey. At table 7, near the kitchen, Bumpy Johnson sat with Frank Lucas and 2 associates, Junie Bird and Freddie Parson. They were discussing expansion into the Bronx, numbers and territories. Frank listened more than he spoke, watched how Bumpy calculated, evaluated, decided. At 11:47 p.m., Tommy Strap walked in, Genovese family enforcer. He carried a leather briefcase containing $127,000. Payment for protection services Bumpy provided to Italian operations in Harlem. Monthly ritual. Always on the 11th. Always at Small's Paradise. Tommy handed the briefcase to Frank. Count it somewhere private. Bumpy instructed. Bring it to my apartment by 2 a.m. Frank nodded, took the briefcase, left through the back exit onto 135th Street. At 11:52 p.m., Frank's car wouldn't start. Battery dead. Street empty. He flagged a taxi, gave the driver Bumpy's address, 409 Edgecombe Avenue. The driver smiled, pulled away from the curb, turned left instead of right. Frank realized his mistake immediately. Wrong direction. The driver didn't respond. At 11:56 p.m., 2 more cars boxed the taxi in. Stopped at the corner of 138th and Lenox. Nikki Barnes stepped out. 6 men surrounded the taxi. Evening, Frank. Nikki's voice was silk over steel. That's a heavy briefcase. Frank said nothing. Calculated options. 6 guns against 0. Running meant dying. Fighting meant dying. You work for a dead man. Nikki continued. Bumpy's finished. The Italians know it. The streets know it. Only question is whether you're smart enough to know it. Nikki opened the taxi door. Here's what happens. You give me that briefcase. I deliver it to Tommy Strap myself. Bumpy looks weak. Can't even trust his driver with a simple pickup. You come work for someone with a future. Frank's hand tightened on the briefcase. Mr. Johnson's expecting this. Nikki laughed. Mr. Johnson. You sound like a butler. How much he paying you, Frank? Couple hundred weekly. Nikki pulled out a money clip, counted $50 bills, dropped them on the taxi seat. 5,000, just for saying yes. Another 5,000 monthly. Your own crew within a year. Time froze. Frank stared at the money. Enough to change everything. Enough to matter. His family in North Carolina needed help. His brother needed surgery. 5,000 could solve problems. But something about Bumpy's calm face, the way he counted money, the way he thought 3 steps ahead. I can't, Frank said. Nikki's smile vanished. He pulled out a .38 revolver, pressed it against Frank's temple. Then die loyal. What Nikki Barnes didn't know was that Frank Lucas had already told Bumpy everything. May 30th, 2 days after the first approach. Frank had reported every bribe attempt to Bumpy, described Nikki's tactics, his crew's patterns, his obsession with embarrassing the old guard. Bumpy listened without interruption. When Frank finished, Bumpy asked one question. "You want to take the money?" Frank said no. Bumpy smiled. "Good. Now we teach Mr. Barnes about patience." June 1st. Bumpy had his mechanic disconnect Frank's car battery with a remote switch. June 3rd. Bumpy paid the taxi driver $2,000 to take Frank wherever Nicky's men directed. June 5th. Bumpy informed Tommy Strap that payment would be late due to a teaching moment. Tommy, who'd known Bumpy 30 years, agreed to wait. June 9th, Bumpy positioned 8 of his men within 2 blocks of the trap location. They waited, watched, ready. At 12:04 a.m. on June 12th, as Nicky pressed the gun against Frank's head, Frank said 4 words. "Mr. Johnson sends his regards." Car headlights blazed from 4 directions. 8 men with shotguns surrounded Nicky's crew. Bumpy Johnson stepped out of a black Lincoln, wearing a gray suit and fedora. He walked slowly, calmly, stopped 3 feet from Nicky. "Remove the gun from my driver's head." His voice carried no anger, just certainty. Nicky hesitated. Calculation warred with pride. 8 shotguns against 7 pistols. Bad odds. He lowered the weapon. Bumpy took the briefcase from Frank, opened it, counted every bill, $127. Correct amount. He closed the briefcase. Looked at Nicky. "You made 3 mistakes. First, you assumed youth beats experience. Second, you thought loyalty could be bought. Third, you forgot that men who announce their moves never surprise their enemies." Bumpy nodded to one of his men. The man handed Nicky a manila envelope. "Inside are photographs. You receiving heroin from your supplier. You paying off Detective Morrison. You meeting with the Colombo family behind Genovese's back. These go to everyone who matters if you touch my operations again." Nicky opened the envelope. His face drained of color. Bumpy continued. "I've been collecting insurance on ambitious young men for 30 years. You're not special. You're not untouchable. You're predictable." Bumpy turned to Frank. "Let's deliver this money. We're late." They walked to the Lincoln, got in, drove away. Nikki Barnes stood frozen on Lenox Avenue, surrounded by his crew, holding evidence of his own destruction. At 17 a.m., in Bumpy's apartment, Frank watched the man count money. When Bumpy said, "You know why we're late, Frank?" and Frank shook his head, Bumpy's answer became legend. "Because I wanted to see if you'd run." Loyalty isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested when staying costs more than leaving. You passed. At 20:45 a.m., Tommy Strap received his money. Never questioned the delay. News of Nicky Barnes' humiliation spread through Harlem by sunrise. The photographs never surfaced publicly, but everyone knew they existed. Nicky's reputation as untouchable dissolved. 2 of his crew members quit. 3 suppliers raised their prices, sensing weakness. The Italians stopped taking his calls. Within 6 months, Nicky would be working as a mid-level distributor for someone else. His canary, yellow Cadillac got repossessed. The 5 families held a meeting at Rao's restaurant on June 15th, discussed Bumpy Johnson's continued competence. Carlo Gambino reportedly said, "The man turned a threat into a teaching moment." That's mastery. They extended Bumpy's protection agreements another 5 years, increased his percentage points on joint operations. Bumpy's position wasn't just maintained. It was strengthened. Frank Lucas' education accelerated. Bumpy began teaching him everything: supply chains, investment strategies, political connections, psychological warfare. Power isn't taking territory. Bumpy explained during one lesson, it's making sure nobody wants your territory because the cost is too high. By 1968, when Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack at Wells' restaurant. Frank Lucas had absorbed 3 years of concentrated wisdom. He'd learned patience from watching Bumpy count money, strategy from witnessing the Nikki Barnes trap, long-term thinking from observing how Bumpy built relationships instead of just extracting profit. Frank would take these lessons and build an empire worth $50 million. His blue magic, heroin operation would revolutionize the drug trade. But it all started on Lenox Avenue, learning from the smartest man in Harlem. The Nicky Barnes incident became required study for organized crime historians. It demonstrated Bumpy Johnson's core philosophy: intelligence defeats force, preparation beats reaction, and reputation is built through consistency, not spectacle. Where Barnes sought attention, Bumpy cultivated invisibility. Where Barnes threatened, Bumpy gathered evidence. Where Barnes moved fast, Bumpy thought 10 steps ahead. This moment revealed Bumpy's greatest strength: understanding human nature. He knew Frank Lucas needed testing, knew Nicky Barnes would overreach, knew patience would frustrate impulsive enemies into making mistakes. Unlike other crime bosses who ruled through fear, Bumpy ruled through respect earned from strategic brilliance. He proved that in a business built on violence, the deadliest weapon was the mind. Real power isn't about guns or money. It's about creating situations where your enemies defeat themselves. Bumpy Johnson never fired a shot at Nicky Barnes, never raised his voice, never showed anger. He simply set the stage, let arrogance play out, and revealed superior preparation at the perfect moment. If this story showed you why Bumpy Johnson was the greatest strategist in organized crime history, hit subscribe. Drop a like if you understand why Frank Lucas called him the smartest man he ever met. Comment, would you have taken Nicky's $5,000 or stayed loyal to Bumpy?